Hello again, everybody. Kanaz Filen back here with you for another episode of Notes from the End of Time. This one is called The Risen God and the Unconquered Son. It's a look at the pagan roots of Christianity. Now, if you are familiar with the modern day Wiccan neo-pagan scene, you're aware that most neo-pagans have a negative to strongly hostile relationship with Christianity. They consider Christianity to be a repressive death cult that steamrolled over the true face of pre-Christian Europe, and on their part, most Christians dismiss neo-paganism either as demon worship or just as simple-minded LARPing for delusional dumb shits. Well, let's be fair here. Both sides have some facts behind their argument. In 380 AD, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, and from that time onward, Christianity did spread the faith by the sword. During the Reformation, we had both Catholics and Protestants happily burning their theological opponents at the stake. The endless ranting about Christo-fascist dominionists who are coming to make America white and Christian again, yeah, it's pretty tiresome and overblown, but we have to admit there really is no question imperial Christianity frequently forced its beliefs on the populists in a way that imperial polytheism avoided. And for those who don't know, I spent a couple decades in the neo-pagan community, and I can say without hesitation there indeed are a great number of simple-minded LARPers and delusional dumbshits in the neo-pagan community. There's also quite a few who dabble in cursing, left-hand practices, and other things which even non-evangelical Christians would identify as satanic. And as I've seen firsthand, there's a great hostility and loathing aimed at Christianity by people who believe that all gods are real except for the most popular and successful one. And part of this stems from the fact that we tend to think of this great divide between paganism and Christianity. Look at our dating system. It starts with before Christ and it ends with Anno Domini, BC and AD. But we don't understand that there were long centuries during which Christianity was just one of many foreign cults that were seeking converts throughout the empire. And while we think of St. Constantine the Great as Rome's first Christian Augustus, the truth is a little bit more complicated. So let's take a look at St. Constantine. Let's start in 310. Constantine has just triumphed over his father-in-law and his one-time ally Maximian. At this point, let me stop for a brief moment to talk about the general situation in Rome in 310 AD. First, a little bit of backstory. From 235 to 284 BC, Rome had what is called today the crisis of the 3rd century. It's also called the imperial crisis, and it nearly shattered. During that period, we had over 25 generals who took power in different locations. There were basically it was an era of what they called barracks emperors. The way that you claimed power was you were a soldier, strong soldier who had a following. Frequently, they came up from the barracks. I mean, they started out as Roman soldiers, became centurions. From there, got a little bit more power. Then they seized the empire. The seizing an empire and holding it, unfortunately, they discovered are two very different things. You had a year of four emperors, where four emperors claimed the throne and all got treated to the Roman retirement plan, otherwise known as a knife in your stomach. Now, there was a near economic collapse. The empire at one point was split into three separate states. There was Gaul, Britannia, and Hispania. Syria, Palestine, and Egypt was the Palmyrene Empire. Then you had the Roman Empire, which is, of course, centered on Italy. Not till 275, 70 through 275, you see the Emperor Aurelian starts trying to reunite the fractured territories and rebuild Rome to something, some semblance of what it had been, during the days of what they call the five good emperors. The guy who really saves Rome, gives it another nearly 2 centuries of life, is a man who gets a bad name among Christians. His name is Diocletian. If you've ever heard of the Diocletianic persecutions, yeah, that was Diocletian. He really didn't like Christianity. He felt Christianity was a threat to the Roman Empire. The Diocletianic persecutions were greatly exaggerated in the historical records. I'll admit that right now, but they were still some of the largest persecutions, the largest persecutions, in fact, that the Roman Empire had seen. Before this, you'd see sporadic mob violence. You saw a few emperors would make rules and they'd have a persecution for a few years. Diocletian made a serious effort to break the stronghold of Christianity, and so that's what he's best remembered for today. Now, I'm not going to give the guy credit for trying to destroy Christianity, but I will give credit where credit's due. Diocletian was an absolute administrative genius. He figured out, okay, one of the problems we have is that our Roman Empire is too spread out, it's too big. We can't just have one emperor handling everything. The bureaucracy has gotten too bloated. He created a system of where he split the empire in half. Western Europe, which is like what we call today, the Western European provinces, were the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire consisted of Italy, Greece, Anatolia, the Levant, modern-day Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and the North African holdings, which were really important for Rome because they were getting an awful lot of their grain from North Africa, and panem et circum, bread and circuses. You don't get bread unless you got grain, and they got the grain they made their bread with from North Africa. So Eastern Roman Empire would handle keeping things stable there, and the Western Roman Emperor, the Augustus of the West, would take care of things in that part of the empire. It worked reasonably well for a very short time. Diocletian was charismatic enough and strong enough to hold things until he decided finally he was going to retire, go back to his little village and grow cabbages. That was his account. He knew the Roman retirement plan better than anybody, and I think he decided to go out on a high note. Under Diocletian's plan, the Western Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, each half was ruled by an Augustus. That was the guy who's in charge. Each man had a second in command who was a Caesar. When Diocletian abdicates and goes back home, Galerius, his Caesar, becomes the Augustus of the Eastern Roman Empire. In the West, a man named Constantius is ruling as the Augustus in the West. He continues to be the Augustus in the West, and his son Constantine serves as his Caesar. In 306, little over a year after Diocletian's abdication, Constantius dies of an unknown illness, and immediately thereafter, Constantine sends a note to Galerius, along with a picture of Constantine draped in the purple and an apologetic explanation that my soldiers insisted that I become the Augustus of the Western Empire, and I couldn't break their hearts, so I now am your co-ruler in the West, and just thought I'd let you know. Galerius was not happy about this. Galerius threatened to burn not only the painting that Constantine sent him, he also was going to burn the messenger that brought it. Cooler heads prevailed, however, when they noted that Constantine had an awful lot of soldiers, and it wasn't certain that they'd be able to overthrow him. What Galerius does as a compromise is he sends a note back to Constantine offering his condolences on the death of his father and saying that actually my friend Severus is going to be the Augustus of the Western Roman Empire, but you will remain Caesar there. Basically, just what he was saying, in fact, was, be thankful I don't kill you, you usurper, and that I let you keep your current job. Constantine, we don't know what he did in response, but we do know he was minting coins in Britannia and in the Western Roman Empire with his face on them and the words Augustus attached to them. So at this point, Galerius is sending somebody else out to deal with it. But Severus gets killed by a guy named Maxentius. Maxentius is the son of another former Augustus, Maximian. And Maximian and Maxentius team up together, drive Galerius back to his birthplace in Austria with his surviving legions. Now, at this point, Maxentius and Maximian are firmly in control of Rome. They start making nice with Constantine because they want to have good relations between them. Constantine, Maxentius, and Maximian, you'll soon learn, none of them trust either of the other, but they understand that for now, peace is going to be necessary. To make peace, Constantine marries the half-sister of Maxentius, the daughter of Maximian, a woman named Fausta. And remember that name, it's going to come up a couple times again. Constantine stays on cordial terms with Maxentius and Maximian, but he remains neutral, and for about a year we have this state of stasis between them. But then former Augustus Maximian gets the idea he might want to be the new Augustus once again, and so Maximian starts plotting with Maxentius' soldiers, many of whom had served with him, tries to get them to overthrow Maxentius. He's surprised when the troops decide they don't want to overthrow Maxentius, and Maximian is forced to flee for his life. He finds his way to Trier. Trevorum, it would have been called then. It's modern day Trier in Germany, where Constantine has his headquarters. There, he's in exile with his daughter Fausta and with his son in law Constantine. And you'd think at this point, maybe Maximian would think to himself, it might be time for me to follow the Diocletianic path and just relax, maybe grow some cabbages like Diocletian, maybe take up woodworking, whatever. But no, as soon as he gets to Constantine's house, he starts plotting to overthrow Constantine and then with Constantine's soldiers take over Maxentius and rule as sole ruler of Rome. Fausta, his daughter, hears of this. She warns Constantine. Constantine forces Maximian to commit suicide. One more danger is gone. Constantine soon learned that there was yet a second danger that was soon to go away. Galerius was terminally ill. From the descriptions we hear from the Christians he persecuted, it sounds like Galerius perished from something called Fournier gangrene. It's basically rotting gas gangrene of the genital region. I'll leave that there. You can look it up if you want to learn more. I definitely don't recommend checking the images. In any event, to celebrate what just seemed to be a stroke of good fortune, Constantine pays a visit to a famous shrine of Granus Apollo located in Andesina. It's about 300 kilometers, about 140 miles east of modern Paris. Now, the pools, springs, and caves of Andesina had been sacred to the Gallic Luci. After the Gallic Wars, when Rome took over, they built a temple to Apollo alongside the shrines of the Gallic sun god, who they called Granus, or they called them together the shrine of Granus Apollo, and to the spirits of the region who lived in the groves and pools nearby. The Granus site was famous for incubation ceremonies. Now, what's an incubation ceremony, you may ask? Well, in an incubation ceremony, devotees sleep within the chambers of a sacred shrine, and the gods come to them with healing and advice in dreams. An anonymous court orator in 310 describes Constantine's visit in a panegyric. What's a panegyric? Panegyric is basically flattery, but let's hear what he has to say about Constantine's dream. The happiness of your affairs reminded you to carry on to the immortals what you had vowed, and so you turned aside to the most beautiful temple in the whole world, where you have seen a god. For you saw, I believe, Constantine, your Apollo, accompanying victory and offering you crowns of laurels, each of which bears an omen of 300 years. You saw and recognized yourself in the form of Apollo, to whom the kingdoms of the whole world are owed. The divine song sang as in the depths, which I now think has happened when you are like him, young and happy and solitary and most beautiful emperor. Now let's flash forward about 2 years from the death of Maximian. You now have Maxentius has taken up shelter in Rome. He's got the bulk of his armies there. The Roman walls are still really strong. At this point, Rome has not been conquered. The city of Rome has not been conquered for over 700 years. He is definitely in an advantageous position, but on the October 28th, 312, at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, Constantine has yet another dream. He dreams that he sees a cross in the sky, and with it he hears the words "In hoc signio vinces," and I apologize for my execrable Latin, "in this sign conquer." So Lactantius, he is a Christian of the 4th century who was who was very close to Constantine. He describes what happens. As he puts it, Constantine was directed in a dream to cause the heavenly sign to be delineated on the shields of his soldiers, and so to proceed to battle. He did as he had been commanded, and he marked on their shields the letter X with a perpendicular line drawn through it, and turned round thus at the top, being the cipher of Christ. Having this sign, his troops stood to arms. The enemies advanced, but without their emperor, and they crossed the bridge. The armies met and fought with the utmost exertions of valor, and firmly maintained their ground. In the meantime a sedition arose at Rome, and Maxentius was reviled as one who had abandoned all concern for the safety of the commonweal, and suddenly, while he exhibited the Circensian games on the anniversary of his reign, the people cried with one voice, "Constantine cannot be overcome." Dismayed at this, Maxentius burst from the assembly, and having called some senators together, ordered the Sibylline books to be searched. In them it was found that on the same day the enemy of the Romans should perish. Led by this response to the hopes of victory, he went to the field. The bridge in his rear was broken down. At sight of that the battle grew hotter. The hand of the Lord prevailed, and the forces of Maxentius were routed. He fled toward the broken bridge, but the multitude pressing on him, he was driven headlong into the Tiber. Now, upon his triumphal entry into Rome, Constantine bypasses the altar where emperors traditionally offer sacrifices, but it's important to note that there were no purges of pagan officials, there were no orders to close pagan temples. It's also interesting to note that once Constantine comes to power, his coins, most of the coins that are minted during Constantine's Rome, in fact, feature Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. And why does Constantine, who, if he's a Christian, have pictures of Sol Invictus on his coins? Why doesn't he start pushing for a stronger Christianity, get rid of pagan temples? And the reason people get confused about that is they don't understand the Roman mindset. Constantine had a vision of Christ in 312. There's no reason to doubt that any more than there is to believe that he had a dream in 310. And the reason I say this is in both cases he behaved like a Roman who believed he'd had visions. For the traditional Roman religion, let's use that phrase instead of Roman paganism. The traditional Roman religion, like traditional African religions or the traditional Brazilian religions, you see, are syncretic. They have absolutely no problem in believing in hundreds of different gods, or more precisely, in believing that somebody else's god is like, oh, that's your understanding of Zeus. Granus, so he's the head of this movement. Well, he's very like Apollo. There were temples in Roman Egypt to Zeus, Amun-Ra, and it was Zeus with the head of a ram, and he was, of course, they were syncretizing the god Amun and the sun god Ra into Zeus. In the case of Sol Invictus, the Saul was a prominent Roman sun god. He was a very ancient sun god. He had been fairly minor god within Roman theology for a while. In a century before Constantine, there was a emperor named Heliogabalus. He was a Syrian of Roman birth. He came to Rome and decided that he was going to replace the gods of Rome with one god, the Syrian sun god Al-Gabal. Now, the Roman Senate, the Roman military didn't take kindly to this. Elagabalus and his mother are killed. Their corpses are thrown in the Tiber. So it's entirely possible that Constantine knew that, okay, if I decide I'm going to enforce the law to make Christianity the official religion, I could very well end up like Heliogabalus. But it's also possible that, in fact, I think it's probable that Constantine had an actual vision of Granus Apollo, and he syncretized that with Sol Invictus. As somebody who grew up in military camps, who spent a lot of times among soldiers, he was certainly exposed to the honor of the unconquered sun, Sol Invictus. So he puts Sol Invictus on his coins, as a tradition and as a nod to Granus Apollo. In 321, when he introduces the first official Christian Sabbath, he phrases it as, "On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. In the country, however, people engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits, because it often happens that another day is not so suitable for grain sowing or for vine planting, lest by neglecting the proper moment for such operations, the bounty of heaven should be lost." And what we're seeing here is he is syncretizing many ideas of the Sol Invictus cult and bringing them into Christianity. One of the famous ones, of course, is that Sol Invictus is born on December 25th. That date may ring a bell with you. And you might think that, well, Christianity is a monotheistic religion and the Roman traditions were polytheistic, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong, but neither would you be entirely right. The Stoics, for example, believed there was one logos, or as you would say if you translated it into English from Greek, one word. If you might remember St. John saying in the Gospel, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God and was God. The Greek word he used was logos, and no Stoic would have even raised an eyebrow at that. Neoplatonists believed that all gods were emanations of one divine source. By the time of the 4th century, the amount of Judaism and Jewish influences that you find within Christianity, at this point, the best way to describe it is Judaism is to 4th century Christianity what tiki bars are to Polynesian culture. Christianity in the 4th century and going forward definitely uses some trappings from Judaism, some Hebrew words. Of course, they venerate the Old Testament, though they have their own take on it, which is completely different than the take that an observant Jew of the 4th century or of the 21st century would have. After Constantine, we even moved the day of rest from Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, to Sunday, the traditional Sol Invictus day of rest. You may think that I'm blaspheming Christianity or that I'm trying to disprove Christianity. There are lots of angry atheists who are convinced that Jesus is really Sol Invictus, yada, yada, yada. I'm not doing that at all. In fact, I fail to see how stating that a 2,000-year-old religion has roots in philosophies that are centuries older would disprove anything. I mean, it just proves that these are enduring truths. And this is not a conspiracy. Okay, look, we can debate whether Jesus Christ was a prophet, whether he was a revolutionary, whether he was the Son of God. But we all know for a fact that after Christ, the Christian religion was and continues to be developed by humans. Like all humans, the Christians of Constantine's time, including Constantine, grew up in a time and place and internalized its rules and its morals. And that time and that place, polytheism was the default setting. Now, I should also note that quite a few Christian philosophies break radically from established Greco-Roman thought, even though many are deeply rooted in Greco-Roman precepts and preconceptions. Now, as Constantine's imperial reign progresses, you'll notice that you'll see less of Sol Invictus on the coins, and you start seeing more symbols like Kairos or symbols that are associated with the Christian faith. And of course, in 325, Constantine, to deal with the Arian controversy which is sweeping the Christian world at this time, convenes the Council of Nicaea and thereby creates Nicene Christianity. Well, what is Nicene Christianity? Well, at this point, Roman Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Latin Rite Catholicism, which would include Roman Catholicism and many other groups that are in communion with Rome, and the overwhelming majority of Protestants hold to the tenets of the Nicene Creed. It starts with, we believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and in his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. Those ideas are still upheld today by the overwhelming majority of people who identify as Christians. Also, from 326 on, we no longer see any Sol Invictus on inscriptions on Constantine's coins. And that's interesting because in 326, Constantine has his son Crispus and his wife Fausta executed. Why did that happen? And short answer, we don't know. He had all record of them wiped out through what was called the damnatio memoriae. There's a lot of speculation. Like one of the rumors that were going around centuries later was that Fausta was plotting with Crispus, who was her stepson, to seize the throne. There was another claim that Fausta had falsely accused Crispus of rape. Crispus was executed. Then, after his death, Fausta was exposed as a liar. Whatever happened, the idea that Constantine would murder his son and his wife was not really uncommon behavior for Roman leaders. In 48, Claudius has his wife Messalina executed for adultery. 6 years later, Agrippina the Younger poisons her husband and uncle, Claudius, after he proclaims her son Nero heir to the throne. In 59, Nero has his mother killed for her repeated plots to overthrow him. In 211, Caracalla has his brother and co-emperor Geta murdered. Both Nero and Caracalla were said to be haunted by their bloody deeds. Nero hires Persian magicians to drive away his mother's ghost. Caracalla murdered about 20,000 friends of Geta so he didn't have to look at them and be reminded of his guilt. Constantine and his family turned to Christ. Helena, Constantine's mother, who legend has it discovered Faustus' perfidy and then has her suffocated in an overheated bath, goes on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And there the Dowager Queen discovers through visions, intuition, and local legends several holy sites. Beneath a temple to Venus that's built by Hadrian, she found 3 crosses. One of the crosses heals a sick woman, and that one is deemed the true cross. Constantine has a Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which still stands, built above that old temple. They found a nail at that site. It was incorporated into Constantine's battle helmet so he could prove invulnerable to attack. Now, the repentant sinner has always been a popular Christian trope. Christianity holds that we're all guilty of hamartia. That's a word that Aristotelian scholars translate as the tragic flaw. All our efforts to do good often wind up leading only to greater evils, and our greatest virtues can often become our most terrible weaknesses. Christianity recognizes this fact, so would most Greco-Roman traditional religion followers. But Christianity promises a redemption in Christ. And now this redemption would not be unfamiliar to anybody who had been initiated into the Mithras cult, the Eleusinian mysteries, or any of a number of mystery religions that were prominent within the empire that promised benefits in this world and in the next. Now, another thing we have to keep in mind with Constantine's reign is, for most of this time, Constantine has been ruling from Milan. By this point, for decades, very little imperial stuff has gone on at Rome. Diocletian realized Rome was too far away from the action, too far away from the frontier. He moved it up to Mediolonum, which we today call Milan, Italy. Constantine decided he was going to build a Nova Roma, a new Rome, in an even more centrally located spot. So in 330 AD, Constantine and his court moved to the city they've been building for a few years, this Nova Roma, or as he names it, Constantinople. You're probably familiar with this. There'd been a small town on it called Byzanton, if I recall correctly, and it's also known as Byzantium or the Byzantine Empire. And this was a really good strategic idea on the part of Constantine. The rest of the Eastern Roman Empire keeps going, and Constantinople starts to take on a lot of the religious aura that Rome once held. One of the things about Greco-Roman traditional religion, about all traditional religions, they tend to be religions of place. Rome no longer being the beating heart of a massive empire meant that a lot of those traditions lost a lot of meaning. Constantinople becomes the center of Eastern Christianity, or what we would call today Orthodoxy. And to this day, centuries after it became Istanbul, now Constantinople, Orthodoxy still looks to Constantinople, to Byzantium, as a spiritual center. Of course, now if you know anything about Western Rite Christianity, they preserved that idea of Rome as a religious center, even after the Western Roman Empire went into a free fall and a death spiral. We generally date the fall of the West to 476 when Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain, deposes Romulus and he claims the city, but that's really only officially the time the death certificate was signed. Within 381, I think, off the top of my head, the Battle of Adrianople, when the Roman Empire just loses most of its forces to a Vandal invasion, is after that there was very little control in the West from the Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman, the Byzantine emperors, start focusing more on North Africa and more to the east, where the real action. I mean, there were better trade routes. There was more stuff going on in the east. They decided, you know what? The barbarians can take the West and we'll trade with them for amber if we need it. We'll trade with them for furs if we need it. There's no reason for us to live in that damp, rainy, muddy, grand hovel of a continent that we could call the Western Empire. They were basically happy to watch it go, and it went. But in the West, those barbarians slowly accepted Christianity. There was an uneasy alliance for a few centuries between Eastern and Western Christianity. Of course, in 1054, as Europe is still Christianizing at this time. There were pagans in Europe. There were followers of different ethnic traditional religions as late as the 13th or 14th century. And many of those traditions got worked up. They became saints, which, of course, our saint veneration looks very much like the heroine, not heroin, that's a whole different thing. Hero worship cults that you see towards great men in Hellenic tradition. Now, am I saying with this, as I said before, I'm not saying that this disproves Christianity. I'm not trying to prove that Christianity is a survival of the pre-Christian Greco-Roman traditions. I'm just simply saying that it took what it found of value and reshaped it, and it made it Christian. As I like to say, they baptized a lot of those gods and spirits. They turned them into saints, and the people became Christians. Many centuries later, on the site of an old shrine dedicated to a Nahuatl goddess named Tenantzin, several Nahuatl laborers have a vision of Nuestra Señora de la Guadalupe. And to this day, Guadalupe is one of the most beloved Marian venerations, and Mexico still has one of the largest and most devout Catholic communities in the world. And with that, I'm going to bring this to a close here. Thank you again for listening. This is Kenaz Phelan. This has been Notes from the End of Time, The Risen God and the Unconquered Son. Hope to see you again soon.